In the quiet suburbs of Wilmington, North Carolina, mornings usually pass without much notice. Neighbors wave, dogs bark behind fences, and the smell of coffee drifts through cracked windows. But on the morning of March 14, 2014, something broke that routine, something that would ripple through the community like a silent scream. Celeste Rivera, a 27-year-old stylist and owner of a small but popular salon, had promised to meet her close friend May Lang for breakfast. It wasn't just any casual meeting. Celeste had asked to talk about something life-changing, as she put it the night before. May assumed it had to do with her failing marriage. Celeste had hinted for weeks that she was finally ready to break free from her husband, Bernard Carson. They were supposed to meet at 8:30 a.m. at a cafe just 2 blocks from Celeste's salon. May arrived 5 minutes early. She ordered 2 coffees and waited. 8:45 came. Then 9 o'clock. Still no sign of Celeste. May tried calling, then texting. Nothing. Voicemail after voicemail. Something didn't feel right. Celeste was never late, especially not for something she'd sounded so determined about. Her tone the night before had been calm but certain. "Tomorrow's the day," she had said. "No more hiding." At 9:30 a.m., May decided to drive straight to Celeste's house. Celeste and Bernard lived in a 2-story colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac lined with oak trees and trimmed hedges. To outsiders, it looked picture-perfect, an American dream with a red front door and a white mailbox with their family name in gold cursive letters. But behind those walls, things were far from idyllic. When May pulled into the driveway, Bernard opened the door before she could even knock. He looked normal. "Come even." "She went out early," he said before May could ask. "Said she had errands." His voice was flat, his eyes unreadable. But there was something else. 2 women were inside the house, one sitting on the living room couch, the other walking out of the kitchen with a glass of water. They looked to be in their 30s. When May asked, Bernard simply said, "These are my daughters, from my first marriage. They're visiting." That raised a flag. In the 10 years May had known Celeste, she had never once heard her mention stepdaughters. Certainly not ones who stayed over without her knowing. Trying to hide her growing concern, May made an excuse about needing to use the restroom. Bernard hesitated, then gestured toward the hallway. She knew the house well. And something was off. The bedroom, Celeste and Bernard's shared room, had a distinct chemical odor, like cleaning agents recently used. The carpet beneath the bed was damp to the touch, though there were no visible stains. And more noticeably, the long beige runner that usually lay along the foot of the bed was missing. Bernard's explanation? "I cleaned the carpets this morning. Hadn't done it in a while." He gave a half smile as if trying to reassure her. But May wasn't reassured. She left the house and sat in her car, staring at the front door for several minutes, heart pounding. Her instinct screamed. Something had happened. Something bad. At 10:15 a.m., she called the Wilmington Police Department to report a missing person. Officers arrived shortly after noon. By then, Bernard's daughters were gone. When asked, Bernard repeated his story. Celeste had woken him up around 6 a.m., mentioned she was going out, and left. He claimed he didn't ask where. He was half asleep. He also told police that Celeste had been acting odd, lately, emotional, unstable. He hinted she might have sold some of her jewelry, worth thousands, for quick cash. "She's been dramatic," he said. "But I'm worried. I really am." But Bernard's concern didn't last long. By the following evening, he had booked a flight. 2, actually. 1 for him, and 2 more for his young children. Destination? The Dominican Republic. He told police it was for business. That the tickets had been booked weeks in advance. That it was too late to cancel. They asked him to stay. He didn't. Within 36 hours of his wife vanishing, Bernard was gone. Out of state, possibly out of reach. Meanwhile, detectives began their initial investigation. There was no sign of forced entry. No blood. No struggle. The house was pristine. Too pristine. Celeste's car? Gone. Her phone? Still off. No activity on her bank accounts, credit cards, or social media. May confirmed Celeste had told her she was filing for divorce that day. And yet, there was no divorce paperwork filed. No movement at all since the night of March 13th, when Celeste had dinner with May, left the restaurant around 11 p.m., and was never seen again. By March 16th, the police sealed the house as an official crime scene. But without a body, without a witness, without even a clear motive, there was only suspicion. And suspicion, as detectives knew all too well, was not enough. Not yet. In a town where nothing ever happens, a woman disappeared into silence. No note. No suitcase. No goodbye. Just a wet carpet, a missing rug, and a man who said she left early. What happened to Celeste Rivera that night? In part 2, we step behind the facade of the Carson household and learn what no one ever dared to ask. Before Celeste Rivera vanished, before the panic, the search, and the suspicion, there was a marriage. One that, at first glance, looked like a fairy tale. But under the surface, it had long been cracking. When detectives began pulling at the threads of Celeste's life, they found a woman who had been quietly unraveling for years. Celeste met Bernard Carson in 2008 while working as a volunteer interpreter for a non-profit medical mission in the Dominican Republic. She was 21, young, idealistic, still living with her parents in Santiago. He was 65, an American businessman funding part of the operation. Bernard had money, a lot of it. He owned a specialty lubricant factory outside Asheville, plus a string of small investment properties throughout the Carolinas. His estimated net worth at the time, just over $5.2 million. Celeste, bright-eyed and curious, had never even been on a plane before meeting him. She told her friends later that Bernard talked like a man from the movies, soft-spoken, formal, oddly charming. When he flew back to the U.S., they exchanged emails. Then video calls. Then a surprise return trip. By his third visit, he proposed. People raised eyebrows. Even Celeste's mother tried to talk her out of it. But Celeste saw an opportunity. A life beyond the barrio, the chance to own something, be something, finally live for herself. They were married just 2 months after meeting. She moved to Wilmington in early 2009. The first year was quiet. Celeste spent her days decorating the house, exploring the town, learning English. By the end of that year, she had earned her cosmetology license and was working part-time at a local salon. Bernard, meanwhile, kept to himself, running his business, attending investment meetings, occasionally flying to trade expos. Then came the children. 2 of them, born in 2010 and 2012. Motherhood changed Celeste. She grew more confident, more determined. She began saving money quietly, studying how to run a business. In 2013, she opened her own salon, Celeste's Mirror. It was a modest storefront, tucked between a laundromat and a Vietnamese restaurant, but it was hers. Friends say that's when Bernard began to change. He didn't like her being independent, one of Celeste's employees recalled. He'd show up at the shop without calling. Just stand there. Watch. At home, the fights escalated. Bernard accused her of hiding money, of dressing too revealing at work. He'd freeze her business account for days at a time. Once, Celeste came to work with a small bruise on her wrist. When asked, she smiled and said she fell while folding laundry. Privately, she told May that Bernard had thrown a coffee mug at the wall, shattering it inches from her face. Still she stayed. He threatened to take the kids, May recalled. Said she was unstable. That no court would give her custody. In late 2013, Celeste reached out to a lawyer. She quietly began preparing for divorce. North Carolina law, the attorney explained, allows for equitable distribution, which meant she could be entitled to half of Bernard's assets, especially given the length of the marriage and their 2 young children. Celeste hesitated. He's going to kill me, she told the lawyer, only half joking. But I'd rather fight than live like this. She rented a safe deposit box. Started making copies of financial documents. Passwords. IDs. Even kept a journal documenting verbal abuse, controlling behavior, and suspected affairs. The night before she disappeared, March 13, 2014, Bernard received an official letter from her lawyer. It laid everything out. Celeste would be filing for divorce effective immediately. She was seeking 50% of marital assets, estimated at $2.6 million. She wanted joint custody of the children, but full primary residence. She was willing to allow Bernard regular visitation, but not unsupervised. That evening, according to phone records, Bernard made 3 phone calls between 8:30 and 9:15 p.m. None of those calls were to Celeste. 2 were to numbers listed under his company. The third was to an unregistered prepaid line. At 10:45 p.m., Celeste sent her final text to May. "Dinner was great. I feel clear for the first time in months. I'll call you early." That call never came. When police asked Bernard about the letter, he claimed he hadn't read it carefully. He denied being upset. He denied arguing with Celeste. He denied seeing her after 6 p.m. that night. But his story didn't quite hold. The children, both under 5, were asleep by 8 p.m., and according to their statements, as relayed through family interviews, they didn't hear their mother's voice that night at all. Not even a good night. Then came the house search. Police found nothing damning, no blood, no signs of struggle. But they did find a recently shampooed carpet in the master bedroom, still damp in places. A missing runner rug that had been there in earlier home photos. A faint chemical odor consistent with ammonia-based cleaners. A single earring, wedged under the dresser, not valuable, but noted. The cleaning equipment in the garage was pristine, almost too pristine. No fingerprints. No residue. No fibers. At the same time, Bernard's daughters raised questions. When interviewed, both women, Candy and Marianne, claimed they were visiting their father for a few days. Candy said she arrived on March 12th, Marianne on the 13th. Both denied seeing Celeste at all. When asked if their father had seemed upset that night, Candy said, "He seemed tense. But he always is. He doesn't talk much." May told police that she saw both daughters inside the house the morning she arrived to look for Celeste. But when asked again, Candy changed her statement. She claimed she left the house early that morning before anyone arrived. No signs of violence. No screams. No broken glass. Just silence. And bleach. And a man who said he was asleep while his wife walked out the door. But what really happened inside that house after dinner? In part 3, investigators follow a new trail, one that leads to a box, a factory, and a sound heard in the night. In every unsolved crime, there's a moment, quiet, seemingly small, that reappears like a shadow in hindsight. For the investigators in the Celeste Rivera case, that moment came from a conversation with a factory worker. Wilmington PD had already combed through Bernard Carson's house with no definitive leads. The missing rug. The chemically cleaned carpet. His evasive answers. The daughters who couldn't align their timelines. It all pointed to something, but nothing that could be proven. So detectives widened the scope. They began tracing Bernard's movements after Celeste disappeared. And that trail led to a familiar place, the industrial lubricant facility he'd owned for over 25 years, located on the outskirts of town, a squat brick building behind a chain-link fence. The factory was modest in size, but Bernard had always kept it under tight control. Even after semi-retiring, he visited regularly, usually late, usually alone. When the lead investigator, Detective Laura Vance, arrived on site with a warrant, the workers seemed reluctant to speak. Except one. His name was Marcus Blaine, 38, forklift operator. He'd been there 6 years. At first, he claimed he didn't know anything. Then, quietly, he asked if this had anything to do with the box. Detective Vance paused. "What box?" Marcus hesitated, then led them to the back corner of the warehouse. He pointed to a shelf marked with masking tape labeled BC, Personal. Months ago, he said, Bernard had brought in a sealed wooden crate. Nothing big, maybe 2 feet wide, heavy, bolted shut. The label simply read, "Private, do not open." Out of curiosity, one of the younger guys opened it when Bernard was out of town. Inside? A handgun. A box of ammo. And something wrapped in plastic. Like a cloth, maybe? Could have been nothing. But it was weird. They put it back. Said nothing. And the box disappeared a few weeks later. Detectives requested factory surveillance footage, but most had already been overwritten, except for one drive accidentally archived during maintenance. What it showed was chilling. March 14, 2014, 2:19 a.m. A silver SUV, matching Bernard's, pulled into the factory lot. No headlights. He got out, unlocked the back door, and disappeared inside for less than 4 minutes. Then he drove away. The question was, what did he take or leave during those 4 minutes? That same night, in a neighborhood just 2 blocks from Bernard's house, a couple named Jared and Tina Moffat reported being awakened by a loud metallic crash around 1 a.m. "We thought maybe someone hit their garage door," Tina said. "Then there was this weird pop sound, like a car backfiring, but sharper. Close." No other neighbors reported hearing anything. But Jared insisted, "It wasn't fireworks. Wasn't a car. I've heard gunfire. That was gunfire." With that, police revisited the garage. They hadn't noticed it before, but the left panel of the garage door showed signs of repair: fresh bolts, new paint, a small indentation near the bottom. When asked, Bernard claimed he had accidentally backed into it earlier that week. A repair invoice confirmed he'd paid for a rush service on March 15th. Coincidence? Or cover-up? Meanwhile, the daughters raised more questions. Investigators found text records between Candy and Marianne sent at 6:42 a.m. the morning Celeste was reported missing. "Candy, did you take the box?" Marianne, "Yes. Already dropped it off." "Candy, don't open it. Dad said not to." When questioned again, the sisters gave conflicting statements. Candy claimed the box was just tools. Marianne said she never looked inside. Neither could explain why they were moving private items between each other the morning their stepmother vanished. More troubling was this. Detectives found out that Bernard had purchased a prepaid cell phone 2 weeks before the disappearance. That phone was used to text both daughters between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. on March 14th. The texts had been deleted, but partial logs from the service provider revealed fragments. Garage. No one saw. Box. Before 6. At this point, the evidence was stacking, not with hard proof, but with overlapping truths. A box. A visit to the factory at 2 a.m. Gunfire reported by a neighbor. A garage repaired the very next day. Daughters shuttling sealed items without explanation. Still, no body. Still, no forensics. Still, no direct link. 3 weeks after the disappearance, Celeste's car was found abandoned in a long-term parking lot near a regional bus station, 20 miles outside Wilmington. It had been parked there for 3 days before a patrol officer finally noticed it. Inside, an empty water bottle, a child's hairbrush, a pair of cheap sunglasses, a set of car keys hidden under the front seat. But no fingerprints. Not even Celeste's. The driver's seat was adjusted too far back for someone of Celeste's height to drive comfortably. Surveillance footage from the lot showed the car pulling in at 5:12 a.m. on March 14th. The driver? Balding. Heavy-set. Alone. The timestamp confirmed it, Bernard. But the camera was grainy. No facial match. And when confronted, Bernard claimed, "That's not me. I don't even know where that lot is." He smirked. No body. No confession. But the timeline was no longer just suspicious, it was coordinated. Who helped Bernard that night? What was in the box passed between daughters? And why did he visit the factory at 2 a.m. with nothing to say about it? In Part 4, police search deeper, beneath a forgotten property, and perhaps, beneath Bernard's final mask. By late April 2014, the Celeste Rivera case had hit a wall. No body. No confession. No forensics. Just a timeline that didn't make sense, a missing wife who seemed to vanish into thin air, and a husband who wouldn't stop smiling in interviews. But detectives weren't ready to walk away. There was one angle they hadn't explored, one place that Bernard Carson had managed to keep off the radar. A second home. 10 years earlier, before moving permanently to Wilmington, Bernard had owned a private property in the Blue Ridge foothills, just outside a small rural town called Eldergrove. Officially, the deed was still under the name of a shell company Bernard created in 2003. It was a modest ranch-style home on 6 acres of land. Fenced. Gated. Secluded. Neighbors said they hadn't seen anyone live there for years. But when investigators dug into maintenance records, they found that Bernard had hired a contractor in early 2013 to perform foundation work and landscaping adjustments. Why would a man nearing retirement spend money to repair a house he no longer used? The answer might have been buried. Literally. On May 8th, a forensic excavation team arrived at the Elder Grove property with ground-penetrating radar. In the backyard, just beyond a broken garden fence, they found two metallic anomalies buried nearly 10 feet apart. One registered as a solid block, rectangular. The other? More fragmented, scattered. Over the course of 2 days, crews carefully unearthed the first target. What they found stopped them cold. A white 1990s Ford F-150, wrapped in industrial-grade tarp, buried under 4 feet of compacted soil. Its tires were deflated. Its windows shattered inward. But the license plate matched a partial tag seen in the parking lot surveillance the day Celeste's car was discovered. It was Bernard's second vehicle, one he had never reported sold, stolen, or disposed of. Inside the truck's cabin, police found remnants of clear plastic gloves, duct tape, and several torn trash bags. In the bed of the truck, beneath a cracked plastic lid, was a stain, brown, flaky, and decades old. Initial tests came back inconclusive. But one thing was certain, this truck had not moved in a long time. The second anomaly was even stranger. Buried in a separate pit was a collection of burnt debris, charred wood, rusted wire, melted plastic, and the partial skeleton of a large metal storage box. What was inside before it burned? No one could say for sure. But investigators believed it may have been the same crate Bernard brought to the factory, a crate seen by the forklift operator, passed between his daughters, then never seen again. Had it been destroyed here to eliminate evidence? Possibly. But that wasn't all. A neighbor, an elderly widow named Doris Lennox, who lived down the road, came forward with a story. She said she saw Bernard at the Elder Grove property on the morning of March 15th, just a day after Celeste disappeared. He was hauling something in the back of his SUV, Doris recalled. Looked like a bundle. Tarped up. He backed up to the edge of the woods. When asked why she hadn't mentioned this before, Doris looked away. Didn't want to get involved, she whispered. The pieces were aligning. The visit to the factory at 2:19 a.m. The daughters moving a box before sunrise. The missing Ford buried in a rural yard. The possible crate, now burned. A witness placing Bernard near the burial site the very next day. Still, no body. Still, no cause of death. Still, no direct evidence linking Bernard to a murder. But for the detectives, the picture was becoming clearer than ever. Celeste didn't vanish. She was removed. Deliberately. Systematically. Quietly. When someone disappears without a trace, the truth doesn't float to the surface. Sometimes you have to dig. Through dirt. Through lies. Through years of carefully buried secrets. But could they make it stick in court? Could a jury convict a man with no body, no blood, and no witness? In Part 5, the case turns to the unlikeliest source, a man behind bars, and a confession no one was supposed to hear. By mid-2015, the Celeste Rivera case had stretched beyond a year of interviews, warrants, and buried evidence. The puzzle pieces were scattered across 2 homes, one factory, a parking lot, and a grave made of soil and silence. The police had everything, except a confession. And that was the one thing they needed to close the loop. Bernard Carson had remained quiet, calm, and calculated. He dodged media, declined interviews, refused to answer further police questions. Every attempt to get him to crack ended the same way, a flat stare, a thin-lipped smile, and a line he repeated like scripture, "I don't know where my wife is." But then the walls began to close in. In June 2015, following the forensic analysis of the buried pickup truck, prosecutors filed an arrest warrant for obstruction of justice and unlawful disposal of potential evidence. It wasn't a murder charge, not yet. But it was enough to place Bernard in pretrial detention. And that's where something unexpected happened. At Grayford County Jail, Bernard was placed in a shared unit for low-risk older detainees. Among them was a man named Peter Maddox, 61 years old, former fraudster, self-declared professional storyteller. Peter had been arrested on multiple counts of wire fraud and tax evasion. He was known to law enforcement not only for his scams, but for his uncanny ability to gain trust. A con man with charm, patience, and a memory like a tape recorder. Detectives approached him with a proposition. If Peter could get Bernard to talk, really talk, they would recommend a sentence reduction. Peter agreed. He played it slowly. He never asked about Celeste. Instead, he talked about failure, divorce, greedy exes, losing control. He spun long, bitter stories during late nights in the shared rec room, knowing Bernard was listening. After 2 weeks, Bernard began to open up. Nothing direct, just fragments. Complaints about lawyers. Comments about women taking more than they deserve. One night he muttered, "They never think about what you've built, only what they want to take from you." Peter nodded. He waited. Another week passed. Then, one night, March 31, 2015, Bernard broke. According to Peter's later court testimony, Bernard sat on his bunk, motionless, staring at the concrete wall. Then he said it. "I didn't mean to do it that way." Peter stayed still. "Do what?" "I tried to keep it clean," Bernard whispered. But she screamed. So loud. I panicked. And then she fell. I don't even remember how. I just needed her to be quiet. What about the kids? They didn't hear. I waited. Cleaned everything. Used ammonia. Got rid of the rug. And the body? The ocean, Bernard said. Southport Pier. Weighted her down. Punctured the lungs. She won't float. Peter said Bernard didn't cry. Didn't look guilty. Just exhausted. He later told authorities Bernard described using the box from the factory as a container to carry the body. That he had practiced with weights. That he had studied it online. The entire confession, Peter claimed, lasted 20 minutes. But there was a problem. Peter Maddox was a liar. That was his profession. His entire history. Defense attorneys argued that Peter had fabricated the confession for leniency and pointed out inconsistencies in the jail logs and surveillance, such as timing discrepancies and incomplete audio coverage of shared spaces. Bernard's lawyer attacked Peter's credibility relentlessly. They even uncovered a letter Peter had written months earlier to a different prosecutor offering to gather intel on inmates in exchange for reduced time. Proof, they said, that this was all a setup. Peter didn't deny it. But he insisted, this time, the story was real. Meanwhile, a new witness stepped forward. From a place no one expected, Honduras. His name was Marco Linares, a 34-year-old former scholarship student sponsored by a U.S. benefactor, a man he later confirmed was Bernard Carson. Marco told authorities that in 2012, during a private visit, Bernard had approached him with an unsettling proposal. He asked me if I knew anyone who could take care of someone. Quietly. At first, Marco thought Bernard was joking. But Bernard kept pushing. He offered $10,000. Gave details. Described Celeste as disloyal, manipulative, and dangerous. Marco didn't know what to do. So he stalled. Took the money. Said he was working on it. And then disappeared. In court, Marco described Bernard's obsession with control. He didn't just want her gone. He wanted her erased. Like she never mattered. He also provided emails Bernard had sent in 2012, referencing arrangements, the problem, and finding someone discreet. The emails were real. The account was Bernard's. And the tone matched the darkness Peter had described. 2 men. One in prison. One abroad. Neither knew each other. And yet, both told the same story of a man so afraid to lose what he built. He destroyed the one person who helped build it. Was it enough? Was a partial confession, passed between con men and ghosts, strong enough to make murder stick? In Part 6, the courtroom opens, and a chilling case unfolds with no body, no blood, and only a box full of silence. A courtroom is rarely the place where the truth is revealed. It's the place where stories compete. And in the summer of 2016, the story of Celeste Rivera, her life, her disappearance, and the man accused of making her vanish, was placed before 12 strangers in a North Carolina courtroom. The trial of Bernard Carson began under a cloud of doubt. Because there was no body, no confirmed cause of death, no murder weapon, just suspicion, testimony, and silence. Opening arguments set the stage. The prosecution painted Bernard as a controlling husband, enraged at the prospect of divorce and the division of his wealth. They described a man who had spent years eroding Celeste's independence, only to be blindsided when she found the strength to walk away. They laid out a timeline of disturbing precision. The divorce letter sent March 13th. The late-night disappearance. The cleaned bedroom, missing rug. The 2:19 a.m. visit to the factory. The daughters moving a sealed box. The buried truck. The burnt crate. The confession behind bars. It was, they argued, a murder built on control. A death executed in silence. And a disposal engineered to leave nothing behind. But the defense had a different story. Their opening line? You cannot convict a man of murder without a murder. They didn't deny the fights. They didn't deny the financial strain. They didn't even deny that Bernard wanted to keep his money. But they claimed Celeste left. Voluntarily. They said she staged her disappearance. That she'd withdrawn cash, possibly fled the country. That she was tired of being a wife, a mother, a caretaker. She walked away from a life she never wanted, the defense attorney said. And now my client is paying the price for being abandoned. The prosecution began with May Lang, Celeste's best friend. She described their last dinner. Celeste's mood. Her plan to finally divorce. She was calm. Not angry. Just ready. She was done being afraid. She testified that Celeste never missed appointments. Never ignored texts. Never left her children, not even for a few hours. Then came the forensic experts. A chemist confirmed ammonia traces deep in the carpet fibers, strong enough to erase blood, DNA, tissue. A cleaning technician explained that the type of industrial solvent used was not common in household products and would require intentional purchase. The ground radar team from Elder Grove described the buried pickup truck and burnt debris, noting that no one buries a vehicle by accident. But it was Peter Maddox's testimony that drew the most attention. On the stand in an orange jumpsuit, Peter was calm and precise. He recalled Bernard's tone. His words. The pacing of the confession. When asked why Bernard would confess to him, Peter shrugged. Because I didn't ask. I listened. The defense tore into him. They reminded the jury of his criminal past, his frauds, his deals with prosecutors. Isn't it true, the defense attorney pressed, that you offered to dig up dirt on any inmate in exchange for time off? Peter didn't flinch. Just, that's what I do. But this time, the dirt dug itself. Next came Marco Linares, flown in from Honduras under protective status. Nervous, hands shaking, he read excerpts from the emails Bernard sent him in 2012. Phrases like, "She's draining me. It has to be permanent. If you know someone who can end this, I'll pay." The defense dismissed them as dramatic outbursts, pointing out no payment had been made beyond a small transfer Marco admitted was for helping around the property. Fantasy isn't felony, the defense argued. Then came Bernard's daughters, Candy and Marianne. Their testimony was cautious. Yes, they were at the house the day Celeste disappeared. Yes, their father gave them a sealed box. No, they never opened it. No, they didn't know where it went. Yes, they found the situation strange. But neither admitted to helping hide anything. And neither directly implicated their father. Prosecutors pressed harder. If your father had killed his wife, would you still protect him? Candy looked down. I don't know. By the end of the second week, the courtroom air was heavy with fatigue and doubt. The jury had heard over 70 witnesses, seen 200 exhibits, and watched hours of surveillance footage. No body. No blood. No murder weapon. All they had was motive, means, opportunity, and a man who buried a truck, burned a box, and said nothing when his wife vanished forever. Closing arguments echoed the very heart of the case. The prosecutor faced the jury and said, Celeste Rivera didn't leave her children. She didn't leave her passport. She didn't leave her money. She left behind a husband who had everything to lose. And now he wants to lose the one thing that matters: accountability. The defense responded, "This is not a trial about what you feel. It's a trial about what you can prove. And you cannot prove murder with maybes." No one heard her scream. No one saw her fall. But everyone knew she was gone. The jury would now decide. Was it a disappearance or a killing wrapped in silence? In Part 7, a verdict is read, a sentence is passed, and fate answers what justice cannot. On the morning of September 9, 2016, the jury returned. After nearly 5 weeks of testimony, over 200 pieces of evidence, and 73 witnesses, 12 citizens filed into the courtroom at 10:32 a.m., each one carrying the weight of something not seen, not touched, not physically proven. Celeste Rivera's body had never been found. There was no confirmed murder weapon. No confession on tape. What the prosecution gave them was a story. A story built on control, concealment, and silence. The defense gave them another story, of a woman who walked away. The courtroom held its breath. Bernard Carson sat motionless. He had not testified. He had not once addressed the court. Through the trial, he remained the same, composed, quiet, unreadable. Even now, as the jury foreperson stood, his eyes did not waver. On the charge of first-degree murder, the foreperson said, "We find the defendant not guilty." The pause. A shift in the air. On the charge of manslaughter, "We find the defendant guilty." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Not joy, not outrage. Just something between relief and confusion. Guilty. But not of murder. The judge thanked the jury for their service. Then she recessed for sentencing. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked the same question. Is manslaughter enough when the woman is never found? There was no easy answer. At sentencing, the prosecution asked for the maximum, 20 years. They argued that Bernard showed no remorse, no acknowledgement, no humanity. The defense asked for leniency, citing age, poor health, and lack of prior convictions. The judge split the line. "Mr. Carson, the court cannot sentence you for what it cannot prove. But it can, and will, sentence you for what you did, taking a life and hiding it with chilling intent. You silenced her, not in rage, but in calculation. And now the silence ends. Sentence, 15 years in state prison. Bernard was 73 when he entered North Carolina Correctional Facility for seniors. He spent most of his days in the infirmary wing, under watch for high blood pressure and chronic arrhythmia. He never appealed. He never gave a second statement. He never admitted anything more. And on November 28, 2017, just 14 months into his sentence, he died of heart failure in his sleep. No next of kin claimed the body. He was buried in a state lot. No headstone. No service. Celeste Rivera's body was never found. The ocean off Southport was dragged. Sonar scans were conducted. Divers searched for months. But the Atlantic kept it secret. Her name was added to the National Missing and Unresolved Homicides database in 2018. Her children, now under the guardianship of her sister from the Dominican Republic, were relocated to a quiet town outside Boston. They were told their mother was gone forever, but loved every day. May Lang kept the salon running for another year. She changed its name to Celeste's Light. A photograph of her friend hangs near the front mirror. In it, Celeste smiles with her eyes closed, like someone who, just for a moment, felt free. Some crimes leave behind blood. Others leave behind questions. Some echo in screams. Others in silence. Celeste Rivera never got justice with a capital J. But the truth had already spoken. In the rugs that disappeared, the box passed before dawn, and the man who chose wealth over a woman's life. The storm never roared. It whispered. And in that quiet, she was gone.